Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. DUANE the Great Writer and Seer.
In this real side experience, I would find myself as a passenger in a car. Real side symbology in regards to cars or any other vehicle we may find ourselves within dictates that it is ideas we are embracing, either those we have created or those as created by others we have agreed with. The vehicles that encase us representative of these ideas that we are electing to be the effects of. Should we be driving the vehicles, this is indicative of our being the one who conceived the idea, but finding ourselves as a passenger and revealed is the idea as being the creation by the hand of another who generally will be present in the experience and behind the wheel. Vehicles on the real side may be as they literally seem, simply a mechanism of a point-to-point motion, but then to reach any destination requires the idea of doing such being embraced, that the effects be so, that our destination be gleaned. And so in essence, simply boarding a car, even on the physical level, would still be tantamount to embodying created ideas, expressing as all the simulated features required that our intended destination be reached. The difference being that we are conscious of the ideas embraced, ensuring our destination is achieved on the physical. The real side serves then to unveil oftentimes the unrealized agreements we have secured. The representational vehicles we may find ourselves sat within, and the effects we will have to endure as a consequence. And we are afforded then the option to release these agreements, if indeed what will be generated from them is unsavoury or serves a little by way of awareness benefit. In this case, as the passenger of the car in this experience, I would be in agreement with the conceiver of the idea that the vehicle represented, and it would be an individual that I was in association with until relatively recently in this lifetime, someone I have been in affiliation with for many lifetimes, and that I have made mention of on a number of previous real side experiences. An individual I always refer to as a Troy, though I maintain his anonymity and will not reveal his actual name. Although not expressing any interest in his real awareness or the real purpose of recognizing the isness all real awareness is and a part of, he, like myself, has had many lifetimes in a close association with the dark forces and in all manner of dubious capacities and body forms. We both then have innumerable prior connections with the ill-intended, which serve as viable conduits by which we can engage with these characters, oftentimes directly, sometimes covertly, operating as infiltrators into their various operations, etc., for whatever reasons such may be required. And on the real side, Troy can, on occasion, be very instrumental in facilitating better certain of my assignments that in some way involve elements and expressions of the dark forces, as he maintains, mostly subconsciously, attachment with the dark forces that he had spent so many lifetimes in association with, making him rather adept at operating as a double agent. For despite his attachments, he is agreeable to assist with the beneficial awareness, real side projects, and so is rather a valuable asset in regards to my real side operations. As I mentioned, this experience revealed an idea of his making that I was currently in agreement with, and nothing of an untoward nature as impressions would indicate. He would notice that one of the back doors of the car wasn't completely closed, and point this anomaly out to myself, and on a close scrutiny I also would realize a series of numbers had been inscribed on the exterior of the vehicle. Momentarily halting the car, he would exit and examine the numbers for himself, numbers he would immediately recognize and proclaim as to their meaning. That they were in essence a death notice directed at myself, the particular number sequence was as though a secret code known only to the dark forces, and utilized as a mechanism of information exchange where the realization of a target's impending demise could be known, but only among dark force circles where the code's meaning was circulated and recognized. Troy would further point out that the dark forces had entered the car and made an alteration, hence the back door being slightly ajar. That if indeed the car was then symbolic, that I was to be the effects of the idea it represented, that this included now another idea in association effectively implanted by the darker forces. Cars can represent any of our 5 body vehicles also, suggesting the possibility of the idea of my demise at the hands of the dark forces being installed into the consciousness. A consciousness that expresses as the astral and mind vehicles accordingly, or indeed perhaps even a subconscious, subliminal idea implantation, which would be via then the 5th body or ethereal vehicle. As the deciders of our experience, nothing can feature absent of our agreement as to the idea which will effect it. We must have the idea consciousness implanted regardless of its source and nature, and for the dark forces to eliminate me, this is an idea I must accept and install in my consciousness, or it cannot be an effect potentiality. By whatever mechanism and means this idea then had wormed its way into my consciousness, I had been served a death notice by the dark forces, as indicated by the particular code, and with this determined, Troy would now get back behind the wheel and drive me to what impressions suggested was a dimensional position that presented as a kind of safe spot beyond the ability of the dark forces to reach, as though a hidden pocket dimension within the overall simulator that was virtually inaccessible. At this point, I was considering the possibility that it was a real guide in Troy's outer form, for how would Troy know of such a place? But then, it wasn't beyond the realm of possibility either, and no impressions would verify my suspicions. Regardless, we arrived at this isolated dimensional safe zone, and was received by a female, human in appearance, but one that exuded a very powerful sense of awareness. She presented as though the guardian or keeper of the dimension we now were in. Troy informed her of the situation, and she would proclaim that necessary was it for me to go into seclusion, to evade the dark forces and prevent them from carrying out my assassination. It seemed that as long as I remained in the hidden dimension on the real side, my safety was assured. As I mentioned, I had somehow incorporated the idea of my demise by the dark forces into my consciousness. In essence, I was agreeable to my destruction by their hand, and this then would be my effect to experience until the idea of it was released. She also went on to suggest that I relocate to an alternative position on the physical level, that I go into hiding, go off a grid, render myself digitally untraceable, and even that I reposition myself in an alternate country. For the Dark Force hunt wasn't resigned to the other dimensions of the real side. They were set to deploy their assassin agents on the physical level also. She revealed the reason for this elimination objective, and the subsequent effort that had the idea of my demise consciousness installed. What she said made little sense to my personal self, but impressions afforded a clarification. That one of my ongoing enterprises on the real side had been a reordering of the very foundation of overall consciousness, the ideas that are the bedrock of everything a simulator effected, generally expressing visually as the reformatting of computer code, that ultimately will serve as beneficial, but that has somewhat disgruntled the Dark Force controllers. My continuing efforts in this regard had signed effectively my own death warrant, and although I could have remained in the safe dimension, I elected to depart and go about my ongoing real side business. Though the female guardian informed me I could return to the safe dimension at any moment of my choosing, if I so required the protection it could afford. Troy would accompany me, as though choosing to stand as an additional security measure. Perhaps he was indeed a guide then, after all, and not the genuine individual. We would be once again driving the same vehicle, though I would be behind the wheel, indicative of my being the effects of ideas as created by myself, setting my own intent and direction at that moment. It seems we were to drive to my house, which on the real side represents the consciousness. Perhaps I was intending to go about the process of releasing the idea in association with the dark forces, which, if not relinquished, dictated their ability to eradicate me. But before we reached the house, the consciousness where the idea was to be unveiled and removed, I would bring the vehicle to an abrupt halt, for gliding toward us, blocking the route that led us to my home, was a humanoid figure, but one that comprised entirely of data-like streams of digital coding. I would recognize that I had encountered this creature before, though this was the first moment my personal self had been made aware of it. That through my activities on the real side, even though they were of a beneficial nature overwhelmingly, they had inadvertently given rise to a body form that presented, as I just described, a humanoid data stream. The data itself was a glowing green, reminding me of the coding in the movies The Matrix, and I would dub this character the Matrix Man. This creature had a singular objective, that of my destruction. Though it wasn't a deployed Dark Force asset, it was a something I had birthed through my activities, but was hell-bent on my eradication for some reason that was never made apparent. That should it make physical contact with me, it had the ability to erase me from the very simulator, erase the consciousness that was my creation and personal self at any rate, my real awareness as part of a reality aside from creation was beyond its ability to impact, but a real awareness that would be absent of a consciousness vehicle to operate through, should this creature lay its data stream hands upon me. This would be the equivalent of my computer being shut down and inability to play my character in the computer game I had chosen, for my character would be deleted and no longer part of the overall consciousness that effected as the simulator I had been participating in for the many lifetimes I had up until this point. And as I still have not recognized the all-is, presumably I'd have to either start all over in the same simulator and rebuild the consciousness again, or choose another simulated creation. Theoretically, the awareness stage my real awareness had attained would be retained, though I'd have to go through the process again, that of progressing through the animal forms, accessing eventually a free will wielding a body type, formulating the secondary personal self, undoubtedly getting lost in the creation for lifetimes, then at some stage re-establish connection with my real awareness true self again, and carry on from where I left off previously. Of course, nothing can transpire as experience, absent of our choosing that it be so, as the deciders, and so in essence, this was a situation of my own devising, and should my consciousness indeed be disassembled and erased, and the need to start over, I must assume responsibility as the architect of my experience. I would slam the car into immediate reverse. Intent was I not to allow the Matrix Man to erase my consciousness, for although the consciousness is but a creation, and not that which we actually are, it is a necessary tool, required that comparative reference be generated, that recognition of the true reality can be determined. We need the personal self until it has served this function, and as I have yet to recognize the ears, I wasn't about to let this creature lay its digital data hands upon me. The Matrix Man possessed of eerie, alarming speed, and as I spun the car around and accelerated at the vehicle's maximum velocity, so the creature was able to easily keep pace with us. We would reach a building and exit the car, the relentless Matrix Man hot on our tracks, until it cornered us in one of the building's corridors we were running through. On the verge of it placing its consciousness erasing hands upon my shoulders, I would engage with it verbally, and although it would never utter a word, for indeed its head lacked anything by way of standard human features, including a mouth, just streamers of glowing green data numbers as I said, it seemed to understand my words, and pause as it deliberated over my argument as to why it should cease its intended course of action. I would inform the Matrix Man that I was still very much engrossed with my operations in regards to the overhaul and reformatting of the overall simulator consciousness for beneficial outcome project, and should my vehicle by which my operation could be carried out, my consciousness, be erased, this would not only halt this endeavour, but very possibly unravel it, as it was an ongoing, delicate affair. As I mentioned, this Matrix Man was birthed as an inadvertent side effect of this project and others, with its singular compulsion, that of my destruction, the erasing of my consciousness and personal created self, and although it retained this want and desire, It would as though take stock of my words and fade from the scene, as though electing to allow me at least the time required to complete my consciousness project before returning and carrying out its own objective. A little breathing space then, and perhaps this situation with the Matrix Man could be further negotiated or resolved, as after all, the whole situation was an idea that only could be effected where agreement to it was maintained, a case then of determining its release, or at least amending it that it wouldn't be quite so adversely impacting. Troy would ask me as to why the Matrix Man desired my erasure from the very simulator, and I would confess to lacking knowledge as to the reasoning behind its intentions, for no impressions via the real awareness would bring any clarity to the situation, and so it would remain then as a mystery for the time being. Troy would then grow in height, standing now at 8 feet or so, for although human on the physical, as he retains association and attachment with the dark forces other dimensionally, he very often presents as reptilian on the real side consequently, assuming the stature in association with his actual body type, but wearing an all-concealing black robe that also obscured completely a face that very likely was now lizard-like, hiding the reality of his form from me, even though I was aware that he was reptilian, had seen him as such on numerous occasions, and this wasn't a concern to me. Suffice is to say, he wasn't a real guide after all, but the genuine individual. He would fade from the scene. Invariably, I would encounter him again in future real-side experiences, and it remains to be seen what transpires in regards to the dark forces deciding to administer my death sentence, and that of the Matrix Man's intent also on erasing my consciousness and a place in this simulator, and if any resolution of these situations can be achieved. As I mentioned, we are the deciders of everything we experience. My affected fate lies within my own hands.